I'm trying to arrange a nice little natural background here today. You can see you've got a few plants, got my green tea here.
Yeah.
So
I can see your guitar in the background, Phil.
Yeah. Are we expecting a performance, Pete? Is Phil going to play for us?
I hope so.
Well, we'll see. We might have
You never
lack
know.
of time at the end.
Yeah, probably.
So welcome to the people that are watching us live. Welcome, welcome. Please say hello in the chat thread, the comment thread, and we'll get started in a moment. How's the weather where you guys are?
It's pretty nice here in Chile. So we're in spring now, so it's got a little bit cooler, but no, it's still nice weather here. What about in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, Phil?
Yeah, Las Palmas is great at the moment. We had, people complain here if it's not perfect weather, but it's very nice today, sunny and not too hot. So yeah,
it's a great place to live.
Great Friday here.
Yeah. Here we're still getting a bit of rain. Oh, people are coming in. Great. We're going to get started in a moment, everyone.
Great to see you all.
Good to see you all. Yeah.
Feel free to tell us where you are based and also what you write. I'd love to know what everyone who is attending today is writing. Maybe even what did you write today?
We've got people from all over here. We've got New York City's with us. Great to have you. Portugal. Great.
Wonderful. Suzanne is here. Hi, Suzanne.
Hey, nice. Suzanne.
Genesis, good to see you.
Some of our clients and students with us. Great. Got San Diego, Colombia, Brazil, Morocco, India, London,
Turkey, and Germany too.
We got people from the Americas, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia.
This is
chiming in. That's awesome.
Yeah,
we've got the Cameroons. Someone's here from the Cameroons, Argentina, Tunisia, Dubai. Great. Welcome, everyone. Great. Wonderful. Fabulous.
So, guys, should we get started?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to ask everyone to keep saying hello, but I'm going to take you off the screen so we can get going here. So welcome, everybody. Good day, good evening, whatever time zone you're in, whatever that may be. My name is Paul Duke. Along with my co-hosts and fellow writing coaches, Pete Pozner and Philip Charter, we'd like to welcome you to this special live event brought to you by our Trouble with Writing podcast. Now, we're calling this webinar, Learn to Use Natural English and Get Your Writing Published. Before we introduce this topic, though, fellas, why don't we introduce ourselves? Pete?
Hey, everyone. So I'm Pete Pozner. I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language. And I help journalists with English writing skills so that they can publish, get opportunities with international media. Nice to meet you all. Good to see you here. And Phil?
Great, thanks, Pete. I'm Phil. I am an author and a writing coach. I help lots of different kinds of writers, but often copywriters, content writers, and authors. I love short fiction. That's what I write and I read a lot of. And I'm also a language professional. So my clients and people that I work with are multilingual writers. And I can see we've got tons of you here today, people whose first language is not English. So it's great to see because I love chatting with all of you guys from around the world and figuring out how to make sense of this English language.
And as I said, I'm Paul. And I work with high school, college, and university level non-native English writers in the academic genre. And that includes, as I said, high school people, but also up to university professors who work in English, but it may not be their native language. And It's my pleasure to join you guys here today. For those of you who don't know, the three of us also host a monthly podcast we call the Trouble with Writing podcast. So from wherever you are today, guys, we welcome you. Now, you may be wondering why we would want to address this topic with you today. Well, as writing coaches who work with a diverse range of international writers, we have seen some commonality among the issues, challenges, and concerns our clients face, and we see some of you here. Many of our international writers, for whom English is not their native language, struggle to write in a way that seems to them and to others fluent and natural. These clients may already be highly proficient and fluent writers, yet they feel there is some missing aspect of their English writing holding them back, preventing them from taking their writing to that next level, getting it published and getting it read. So in this webinar today, we're each going to share with you what we believe are some of the elements of writing that can prevent it from sounding natural, and we'll each focus on the writing genre that we work within and offer ways to escape that trap. After our individual presentations, there will be time for us to answer your questions, so please post them in the comment thread, and we'll do our best to answer them at that point. And we'll also give away a free resource pack PDF with examples and summaries of what we discuss here. By the end of this webinar, we hope you will have a better understanding of the key elements of natural English writing and strategies that you can use to make your writing more natural so it can get published and ultimately read. Guys, before we get to our presentations, I think we have to first answer a very important question, which is, why should our writers want to sound natural in the first place? And for that matter, what does this even mean? Pete, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad topic, actually. But I mean, so as a writer, whenever you make choices, language choices, you're going to affect how that sounds to your audience. And it's about making the right choices for the right context. And of course, it's very important because by sounding natural, your writing is going to be easier to understand. And also, importantly, your audience is going to be able to relate to you better as a writer. Would you agree with that, Phil? Anything that you would add?
Yeah, I mean, I'd add a couple of things that there's no one definition for what natural English is. It's something that we thought was a good term to encompass a lot of the things that we talk about with good practices. As for what it is, I would say, yes, something that is shared by all English users around the world. We can all understand it. It's relevant for the context as well, not to write in a super formal way on social media, for example. And it's got some element of style or expression to it that's not just basic plain English. And as for why it's important, I think really because of this movement towards plain English and what AI is doing, which is, taking a lot of the fun and the natural sounding voice out of English, or out of writing in general, I should say. So yeah, I think it's really important that all writers around the world can figure out a way to express themselves well, but be well understood and deliver something that's natural.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Both of what you guys have said, but I would add that in the realm of academic writing, that challenge is to make highly complex academic information sound natural, approachable, and above all else, understandable. And the great challenge and the great skill there is to make those complicated ideas accessible to anyone. I think of the great scientists or public intellectuals who can do that. They can take the amazingly mind-bending ideas and make them clear and interesting to anyone. I think of Professor Brian Cox, who deals with astrophysics, but he does these great documentaries and presents the information very clearly. Okay, great. Now we know what it means, what this term means, this idea of natural. Let's get started on helping our viewers understand how they can make their writing more natural. So, Pete, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. Okay. Okay, so I'll just, here we go. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to show you an extract from a journalistic article, okay? So I'm going to start reading this, and the first thing is I want you to look at the sentence length here, right? So it says, on a snowy winter day, Wroxham Road is cold and tranquil, with a quietude only being perturbed by the sound of wheels making an approach to the end of the path or the crunching of footsteps on snow. Around 150 migrants are conveyed here each day, determined to step foot in Canada, many of whom began their journey as far away as Brazil, with this road in New York State as their finish line. So you're probably thinking that that is one very long sentence, right? So, and there is a tendency for some writers of English as a foreign language to write long sentences, probably not as long as this one. This is an extreme example. But yeah, I know that, writers, with Spanish as a first language, Hungarian, they've told me that they tend to write quite long sentences in their own language. So one thing is in English is to avoid packing too much information, too many clauses into one sentence. So that's the first thing. Another thing here is let's look at the highlighted words. So we've got Wroxham Road is cold and tranquil, with the quietude only being perturbed. So maybe you're thinking, hopefully you're thinking these words, especially quietude is very formal in English, right? Tranquil is definitely more formal in English than it is in Spanish, right? And the same with perturbed. So another tendency is that we sometimes have transfer or interference from our first language to English. And it's good to know, especially words that come from Latin, they tend to be some of the more formal in English than in Spanish or Italian, for example. So you want to be careful with those words. If we read on a little bit, it says, perturbed by the sound of wheels making an approach to the end of the path. Now, if you notice, this phrase here is quite long, right? Making an approach to. What's happening here is this is a nominalized form, right? So approach here is being used as a noun, which is really unnecessary, right? We can use approach as a verb, right? And that's going to sound more natural, right? Less formal, less wordy, right? So we can take out this making and the preposition to. We can just say approaching, something like this, right? And just one more. So it says, footsteps on snow, around 150 migrants are conveyed here each day. Again, conveyed is very formal. Here you could use, instead of are conveyed, you could use a nice phrasal verb. Let me show you. So we've got around 150 migrants are dropped off here each day. So phrasal verbs can be very useful in English when you want to keep a less formal, more conversational style. That sounds much more natural, doesn't it? Around 150 migrants are dropped off rather than conveyed, right? The other words I've replaced here, instead of tranquil, quiet, right? It's less formal. Instead of quietude, again, really very formal, silence. And instead of perturbed, we could just say interrupted, right? So now this sounds much more natural. Look at also the sentence length now. It's been divided into, we've got about 3 sentences here, I think. And also we've divided it into 2 paragraphs. Okay, so that reads much better now, okay? One more paragraph. So it says here, just going to read you the first part. It says, while the federal government tried to stem the tide with warnings that arrival in Canada was not an automatic ticket to stay, The influx caught Canadian officials off guard, and Montreal's Olympic Stadium was briefly converted for housing purposes for newly arrived migrants. Now, what's happening here, the highlighted part at the beginning, this is actually a subordinate clause. Now, I would argue here that the most important information is in the main clause after the comma. So where it says the influx caught Canadian officials off guard, and Montreal's Olympic Stadium was briefly converted for housing purposes for newly arriving migrants. That is the most important information, I would argue. So what you want to do is sometimes think about avoiding these long subordinate clauses at the beginning and turn it around and start with the main clause. That way you're going to be more direct, so it will be easier to understand for your audience. It will sound more natural. So here we go. So we started with the main clause, the influx caught Canadian officials off guard. And then we've got the subordinate clause. Into a separate sentence at the end here, right? The federal government tried to stem the tide with warnings that. And just one other little change here. If you noticed, we had here for housing purposes, right? This is also, it's a little habit that some writers have. A lot of writers with English as a first language do this. They use these abstract words for housing purposes. Why do we need to say purposes, right? We don't. We can just say converted into housing. Okay, so it's shorter, it's more concise, it sounds less formal, it sounds more natural. Okay, so just to summarize, areas of focus here, you want to help readers by avoiding long sentences that contain too much information. Next, be mindful of the formality of words. A good dictionary will help. So, for example, we saw this word quietude. If you look up quietude in a good dictionary, it will tell you formal, right? So you want to avoid those types of words, translated sometimes from your own language, right? Next, for lively writing, use verbs instead of wordy nominalized forms, okay? Learn to use phrasal verbs to help develop a natural conversational style. Be direct by avoiding long subordinate clauses at the beginning of sentences, and avoid meaningless abstract nouns, which can sound pompous rather than natural, okay? So that's what I wanted to share with you. And just a heads up, stay till the end to get some really valuable bonus material. So just what I'm going to share with you is a journalistic article with 12 phrasal verbs and definitions to help you develop a natural conversational style. I'm going to give you 10 examples of how to avoid long, formal sounding words, right? So that you sound more natural. And I'm going to give you single words versus multi-word expressions, right? So using single words rather than multi-word expressions is going to, again, keep your writing more concise, right? I'm going to give you 9 examples of how to make your writing flow naturally instead of dragging, all right? And that's apart from all the wonderful materials that Phil and Paul are also going to share with you. So make sure you stay till the end. And now I'm going to pass you on to Phil.
Thanks, Pete. That was so interesting that you were talking about nominalized forms and like shorter sentences, or the way that we format sentences as natural. Maybe something I hadn't thought about fully with, what makes English natural sounding, but completely agree. Like the something of something, those nominalized forms are something to watch out for. Maybe they're okay in academic writing, Paul, but in other forms, sure. Great. Well, I'm going to share with you guys a cover letter. I'm sure that I think a lot of you have signed up for this webinar via LinkedIn, and we do a lot of writing there. So LinkedIn is a place where we're going to maybe find a job or apply for jobs. So I hope there are some of you out there today who you're going to get something from this. This is an example of a content writing role. So it could be any writing job that you're going for. And before I begin, I should say that there's no one way to write a cover letter. Right? Some of you might think, oh, that's a bit too formal, or it's too short, or it's too informal. it's always important to think of the reader, consider the reader, and really value their time. Recruiters and people who are sifting through hundreds of job applications are not going to be impressed if they have to read 1,000 words about your work history. So, without further ado, let me share some tips for if you're applying for English, making this cover letter easy to read, impactful, and natural sounding in English. So the first thing we want to do in a cover letter, something which accompanies a CV, is say that you're applying for the job, introduce yourself. So here we go, we've got this example. I'm excited to be applying for the writer position as an efficient professional with 3 years of technical, analytical, and copywriting experience. I enjoy working on a variety of projects. Pushing myself as a writer has always been important to me, and I know that at Dream Jobs, I will have the opportunity to upscale and extend my skills while creating quality content for your team. Now, hopefully there's nothing untoward. There's nothing terrible about this approach. You'll notice the words in yellow, though. So we've got a few things here which could definitely be improved. So an efficient professional, right? Both these words are good. It's good to be efficient and it's great to be professional, but it's not typically two words that we find together in English. Right? I've never heard someone introduce themselves in this way, but perhaps in your first language it might be. So you have to watch out for these pairings of words. I enjoy working on a variety of projects. We've got a something of something here, a variety of projects. So that's one to switch and change down. And then we have I have the opportunity to upscale and extend my skills. Well, these are quite positive verbs. They're not quite right in terms of meaning. So let's have a look at a better version. As a pro writer with 3 years of technical, analytical, and copywriting experience, I've learned that variety keeps me on my toes. Pushing myself as a writer has always been important to me. I know that at Writech, I'll have the opportunity to grow my skills while creating quality content for your team. So what's changed here? Pro writer. Well, you might think, oh, it's a little bit informal because it's an abbreviation of professional, but it's a bit snappier. And as a writer, you want to show your personality a little bit and your ability to run a concise way and that kind of snappy way. The next one we changed, something of something, a good amount of variety, to variety keeps me on my toes. I wonder if you've heard this idiom before, to keep me on my toes. It means to keep you reacting, to keep you to keep you in a state where you're going to be reacting to something and you can do that well. Finally, the growing my skills, that's maybe a more visual verb, a verb which just fits a bit better with improving or increasing quality. So yeah, there we had sort of snappy word, an idiom used, and a better verb. All right, next, what do we want to do in the cover letter? We need to say a little bit about our work history. I'll just read this quickly. During my time at Random University, I studied English with an emphasis on business writing. This enabled me to focus on developing my technical writing skills. My previous position at Generic Company provided me with a sizable opportunity. I was able to renovate our company's internal memo system to reflect updated verbiage and wording. Furthermore, I participated in creating social media and digital platform content for the organization. This helped expand our social media following by over 50% in just 3 months and attracting new clients. There's some good stuff in here, especially that the candidate is focused on what is, the benefit. What is the result of their work? This increasing social media following. We've got 50% there. That's in just 3 months. That's a tangible win. But some of these words in yellow, again, not ideal. So we've things which are a little bit too formal here. Don't sound natural, like sizable and to renovate. Not quite the right choices in vocabulary there. Also, we have this academic sounding linking term, right? I often say outside of academic work, we don't really need moreover, furthermore, therefore, words which sound more formal with linking. Also, look at it, it's a big block of text. Is the recruiter going to want to read through that? Maybe they would prefer something like this. So let's look at the changes. We've got, instead of I studied English with an emphasis on business writing, I majored in English. We've got some more exciting idiomatic languages. Again, rock solid business writing skills. That's something which, again, I think shows a bit of personality and visual aspect. This enabled me to focus on my technical writing skills. It says that the company provided an opportunity. Here, let's switch that to something active, right? I earned an opportunity. Make the actions about you as an applicant, right? Use verbs which show what you did and that you earned an opportunity. You weren't just given it. You'll also see I've included some bullet points down here. How you format writing, how you format emails is very important to how we're understood. These bullet points, we can consume them nice and quickly. Right, we've got 4 tangible results here of your work. Let's look at these yellow words as well. We've got revamped, generated, boosted, secured. These are all higher impact verbs, right? They're slightly more extreme. They're not these generic verbs which are more adaptable, right? Like be or have or get or do. We want specific verb choices, and this is where I think natural English is quite different from plain English, right? Which might not use words like this. Okay, I hope you're still staying with me. Final part of the application is a short part. We need to say, so I'm applying for the job and I'd like an interview, or thank you. So this example, we've got an academic sounding linking term again in conclusion. They say, I'm someone who's detail-oriented, driven, and highly dedicated to creating quality work, and I anticipate learning more about the writer position. Thank you for your time and consideration. These 2 words are highly dedicated. Again, I'd say that's not, for me, a natural collocation. It's not often found together. We'll see what I suggest in a minute. And anticipate, a little bit like what Pete was talking about with these Latinate words, right? Words which are often shared with other European languages. Anticipate. Let's have something a bit more informal. I'm looking forward to. Right, I'm looking forward to learning more about the position. Thank you for considering my application. So you'll see, hopefully, that I've reduced the length of this a little bit, and some of the things to focus on, areas to focus on for writing a cover letter, which is going to sound natural, it's going to be easy to read, are these. Really focus on collocations, typical word pairings that go together. We saw a couple in that example. Upgrade your verbs, make strong verb choices in the right places where you want to show impacted action. Use verbs which demonstrate that. Don't just stick to the plain English versions of have, do, and get, and be and put. Consider adding personality. You are writers and you're applying for a job where you have to write. So show some personality and show that with some idioms and phrases that are gonna work well for you. And get rid of those formal linking terms. Remove those, howevers and nevertheless, unless you're applying for a PhD scholarship. Bonus tip, remember to sell the benefit. Sell your results of your work, not what you did. Hope you found that useful. All of this will be provided in that resource pack, and I'll also give you some really useful links to get to grips with collocations and some of these phrases that we talked about. So check that out, and I'll be sharing that with you soon. Over to you, Paul.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Before I get into my presentation, I just want to acknowledge that some people are experiencing some audio breakups. We do apologize for that, guys, but something to bear in mind is that we are actually in 3 different parts of the world right now. So maybe the internet is not helping us. I've checked all the audio settings here, and we're in the best possible setup, but we are going to have some internet breaking up. Okay, so I'm going to talk about writing academic essays. So I'm sure a lot of you have done this, whether it's in your first language or English, if it's your second, third, or fourth language. And I'm sure you've experienced the challenges that are both given to you and that you discover in the process of doing this. First, I'd like to quickly mention what the differences are. Academic writing is built around explanation, generally, explanation and argument. And the goal of an academic writing piece is to convey an idea or an opinion or to explain something. And the topics tend to be fairly complex, whether it's a first-year university paper about a history event or a PhD research study investigating the complexities of virology. Either way, the goal is to present complex information in a way that's understandable, initially for your teacher, but also for a wider audience. And there are challenges to that, especially when you've learned English as a learner in a language school or a university program that deals with English as a second or other language. What I think happens a lot to students is as they are moving from beginner to intermediate to advanced levels, initially they're trying out new vocabulary, new grammar, new sentence structures. And of course, they want to demonstrate to the teacher that they're able to use all this great vocabulary. And maybe they've been given a list of academic vocabulary and they want to use it. And so they use it and they use it and they use it a lot. And often what happens is, as they move upwards in their English education, nobody tells them to put the brakes on the car. Nobody teaches them how to control all of this academic phraseology, all this academic grammar, all this academic vocabulary. And what ends up happening sometimes is their writing becomes overly academic, let's say, or overly verbose. And that brings about another problem, which is that it can hide the actual content. It can obscure the meaning that you're trying to convey. So I want to show you an example of a single paragraph that is sort of guilty of this problem. So here we have a fairly long paragraph. And if you look closely, you can see a couple of things happening. You can see a lot of repetition of particular words. You can also see a lot of usage of those discourse marker words, those academic transition words that Philip pointed out in his presentation, don't belong in an email. I'm glad, Phil, you pointed out that especially problematic use of in conclusion. In an email that a person can see at a glance, you don't need to tell them that they're entering the conclusion. It's quite obvious visually. They can see it's the last paragraph on the page of the email. So you don't need to tell them, hey, we're approaching the conclusion. However, in a longer academic paper, you might need that. So in an academic paper, whether it's a 5-paragraph essay for a beginner or a master's level document that may be 50 to 100 pages, or a PhD document that may approach book length, those transition words become necessary as little guideposts to orient the reader, because it's very easy to get lost in an essay when it's really long. So what I think a lot of students miss out on is that these techniques have their place. Using transition words have their place. But they're learning how to write an essay at a small scale, 1 page or 2 pages, because that skill is scalable. If you learn to write a 5-paragraph essay, you can build that out to a larger size essay of 10 pages, 20 pages, 100, 500. The same skills are used. So in a short essay, we don't need to use however a dozen times. So let me show you what this paragraph looks like with the highlights. In yellow, you can see highlighted the transition words. And we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least 9 uses of these words, usages. I see 2 howevers. I see conspicuously. I see a couple of therefores. And underlined, you can see repetition of the phrase increased taxes. Now, some of you know that, you should know, I hope, that a paragraph in English represents a single idea. And it's usually established, whatever that idea is, in the first sentence. That's what we're taught. The first sentence establishes the idea. That's what we call the topic sentence or topic statement. And inside that topic sentence is often the most important word or phrase of the topic. We might call that keyword. So for example, in the first sentence here, we have the government should increase taxes. So now it establishes the topic of this paragraph as increased taxes, or the increase of taxes. Now, the beautiful thing about a paragraph in English is that it unifies that idea. And if you establish it once, a reader will assume that the entire paragraph is about increased taxes. Therefore, I just used one of those words, you don't need to repeat the phrase increased taxes 100 times. The reader is already aware that that is the topic. So we can see a lot of repetition here. Increased taxes, increased taxes. It is a key word of the topic though. It establishes the topic. And I always tell my students, when you establish a keyword, don't use synonyms for that word. You may have to repeat that. Not 50 times, right? Just the minimum amount of times. But I prefer not to use a synonym for that because the repetition of that keyword a few times reinforces the idea, okay? Here we have far too much repetition. The other thing is we have transition words at the beginning of just about every single sentence. Transition words are there to orient the reader, remind them of where they are in the topic, or remind them how the idea is shifting. The problem is, one paragraph is about one idea, so there shouldn't be too many shifts of the idea. Transition words are better used in the larger context of the essay, or the 50-page, 100-page thesis, or the book. Because once you get to book length or thesis length, it's like a hike in the forest. It's very easy to become disoriented and lose track of where you are in the topic. And the transition words or discourse markers remind you of where you are. I live in Vancouver, Canada, close to the mountains, and we have amazing hiking here. And if you've ever hiked in a forest, you know how easy it is to get disoriented unless you're an expert navigator. But a lot of trails will have occasional signposts, and they'll have a map of the entire mountain section where the trail is, and they'll have a little "you are here." So it orients you at all times where you are in the bigger picture. in an essay, these discourse markers do that. They mark where you are in the discourse. But if you use them too often, as is the case here in this one paragraph, it can overwhelm the reader. And as both Pete and Phil have told us, reminded us, we should always be thinking about the reader, because they're the one that will experience your writing. And they're going to experience it as it unfolds, word by word, sentence by sentence. And if they constantly encounter, therefore, however, in addition, notwithstanding, it stops the movement of the prose. It stops the movement of the text. And if that happens, they may forget what you're talking about. They may lose the idea. And that defeats the purpose of the writing. Remember, the writing's purpose is to explain the idea. So often what happens is, with my students that I work with, they've been taught to use these discourse markers. They've been taught to emphasize the key words, but they often haven't been taught how to control them, how to use them judiciously or sparingly or not too often. And they haven't been warned of the dangers of using it too much, which is you may hide the actual meaning of the paragraph behind all these words. So I suggested to this student to eliminate the repetition, because it's very clear the paragraph is about the increase of taxes, and to greatly reduce the number of transition words. So let me show you how that looks. What you can see here now is that the paragraph is much more concise, and there's actually only one transition word toward the end, the second last sentence, therefore. In the middle, there's a transitional phrase, despite these challenges. So instead of repeating transition words like therefore, you can make a phrase, several words that do the same job. Despite these challenges, tax increases can provide. Now you'll also notice there are fewer instances of increased taxes. It's still a keyword of the topic, so it is necessary, but you don't need to use it as often. In the second line, you can see the main reason for such increases. So instead of saying tax increases, again, you can just say such increases, because you're pointing to a previous instance of increased taxes or tax increases. Now, one of the things that happens when a student sees their paragraph shrink like this is they panic, because they've been taught to fill the page with the paragraph or to meet a word count if they're writing to a word count. And what I like to remind them is that once you remove unnecessary transition words and you cut out repetition, one of the powerful things that happens is now when you read it, you can start to see where areas where something isn't fully explained. So making it concise makes it smaller, yes, but don't worry, because it reveals absences. And one way to find those absences, areas that need to be elaborated on, is to ask questions when you read a sentence. Here are a couple, right? Here it mentions the phrase income equality, but someone might ask, what is income equality in the context of this essay? There's no elaboration about that. So that could be a whole other sentence that you have to add. So your paragraph starts getting bigger again. So don't worry about the word count. Here's another one. Who exactly are those most impacted? It hasn't been made clear yet. So if a reader is going to have these questions, you want to satisfy their curiosity. Remember, they're reading to hear your explanation of this topic. So if they have questions and you don't answer them, it's going to frustrate your reader. You don't want to do that. You want to satisfy your reader. So this little test of read your paragraph and identify questions that might pop up that are unanswered. Here's another one. Which programs are you talking about? This is a great moment for an example. The government to invest in social programs, such as what? It may be obvious for you in your country, but what about my country? Different countries may have different social programs. So there are 3 questions in this paragraph that as a reader, I would like to see explained or elaborated upon, and they're not. So once again, this paragraph is going to expand. So any student that worries after an edit that their paragraph has gotten too small because we eliminate repetition or transition words, don't worry. There's always room for expansion. Notice also here, guys, that in the second last sentence we have therefore. And it's the only transition word we've used. So it pops out, right? It stands out in relief to the rest of the paragraph. And it signals something because it's punchy. I call that punchy. It stands out. Because that does that, it signals to the reader that something has shifted, something has changed. We are transitioning into the final summary sentence. So because we've eliminated all the other transition words, this one actually has power. It has signaling power, which is what it really should do. So just to sum up here, guys, in academic writing, we do need to use discourse markers, especially as your essays get longer, right? And eventually when you're a PhD candidate, you're going to write a big book. It's very easy in a book with 1,000 paragraphs for a reader to get disoriented or lost. That's why we need discourse markers. That's why you learn to use them. You don't necessarily need them for a shorter essay or a short paragraph, or in Phil's example, an email. Also, instead of transition words, you can always use phrases like due to this or because of this. And the topic sentence, which maybe we can talk about another time, the topic sentence has a great deal of power. It establishes your topic, establishes your keywords, and if you do that clearly, you don't need to repeat it so often. So use the topic sentence and use the power of paragraph unity. If your paragraph is unified around a single idea, you can eliminate a lot of repetition because you don't need to remind your reader what the paragraph's about. And again, use plain, simple vocabulary when it's wherever you can. The idea in an academic paper, the idea is going to be complex. That's unavoidable. There's no need to make the vocabulary or the language complex. Keep that simple and the complex idea will be understandable. And as a result of all this, focus on delivering your point fully with all those questions answered that a reader may have, but precisely and concisely, right? Because that will lead to writing clearly, all of which combines to make your academic writing more natural. And someone always tells me, yeah, but teacher, I'm in the field of molecular biology, or I'm a history major, and we have specific jargon. Yeah, use that. There is sometimes those words, that vocabulary is unavoidable. So use it. But in all the other times where you don't need those kind of Latinate words, as Phil pointed out, those multi-syllable academic sounding words, if you don't need it for your discipline specific topic, don't use it. Use plain language. Why? Because in the end, you're trying to make a clear point. You're not trying to dazzle your teacher anymore. At the university level, they're not impressed with your dazzling use of vocabulary. They're going to be dazzled by a clear explanation of a complicated topic. So guys, that's all I have to say on the matter. Let me just get my presentation off screen.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Illuminating. It's interesting to see the differences between all our three types of writing that we help people with, and what makes things natural sounding in those three disciplines.
Yeah.
Great. Don't forget to get your questions in, everyone. I see a few coming in on the chat.
I have one here. Shall we jump right into that, fellas?
Just before we do, should we share our amazing resource pack? I'm going to share that. I'm going to put that in the chat of all the platforms that we're streaming on. So check the messages. You should see it now. It should be something that you can download. You don't need to pay anything for it or do anything for it. Just
I've
Should
popped it
be
in there as
seeing
well.
that now.
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. All right, yeah. Let's answer some questions.
Okay, I have one here. Somebody asked a fair amount earlier, I think when Pete was presenting. Hopefully they're still with us. So this is from Anik. Would the use of generative AI bots such as Hemingway Editor help simplify and make English writing flow naturally? What do you think, fellas?
I'll go first. I'll take this one. I suppose Hemingway Editor, as far as I understand, is not generative AI. It is writing AI, right? And it will pick up sentences that are particularly long or words that could be reduced. It's mostly used by marketers, copywriters who want to simplify and make text more readable. So if you're writing for web, it is a very useful tool. It will tell you how readable your text is, and it will make some suggestions for how to make it a bit easier to process. Like all AI, it is hard coded. They have hard rules, like the passive voice is bad or is wrong. In Pete's piece of writing, for example, I noticed a passive voice and thought that's appropriate, right, for that particular sentence, for that style. So I would say, yeah, it can be useful, especially if you want to increase the readability of your work. It's not necessarily right for all contexts of writing. So still a good idea to think about, the points we mentioned for our different venues of writing.
And by the way, there's a follow-up to that, Phil, which is...
good to know.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Annie.
I'll just add also, at the end of the day, you're the writer, so you should make the final decision, right? So it's good to use these tools to support your writing, but don't make the mistake of trusting, right? Always trusting these tools to make decisions for you. Just let them guide you, give you suggestions, and then you make the final decision.
Here's another question.
Good point.
For an essay to apply for a scholarship master's program, are there any YouTube tutorial videos that you would suggest?
That sounds like one for you, Paul. Paul's the YouTube master and the academic whiz.
Thank you. There are a lot. I would not recommend any specific ones offhand. There was an English teacher who specialized in making YouTubes about that. I don't. My YouTube work is a little more frivolous and focused on grammar, and me playing dress up in detective drag. But let me think about that. Maybe in the description box or a future, once we post the recording, I'll put it in the comment thread. I'll do a little sniffing around and see what I see, what looks reliable and credible. But there are an awful lot of videos out there you can turn to. One of the links I put in our resource pack is to the online writing lab in Purdue University, which is updated monthly as sources change. Like it includes all the latest electronic sources and how to cite them and all that. They may have some videos available, so let me look into that. I don't know offhand. Let me just scan here to find any outstanding questions.
I've just seen a comment from Editor, hi Editor, that says she can't access the link. If you can't, just send one of us a message, right? If you've got if you're a connection on LinkedIn, or if you've if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube or anyone else, just send us a message and we'll send you the PDF.
There's a kind of a cute comment here. I just want to find it. Because I want to say thank you for this comment. Here it is. Pallavi happens to know that I recently had knee surgery and she feels that my standing is uncomfortable. So Thank you for that comment, Pallavi. That's very kind of you, but I'm quite comfortable now. I've done pretty well in my recovery.
That's got
Now,
to
I
be a
did see
first,
another
hasn't
question.
it? Students telling teachers to sit down.
Amazing. It's quite a turn. What do we have here, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, repetition's it's a delicate balance, right? Because sometimes it's useful to emphasize things, but if you use a whole bunch of repetition, nothing gets emphasized. So I always encourage students to save the repetition for when you really, really want it. Then it has power because it pops out or it's punchy, has more impact.
I think also that question is about what you were saying, Paul, about when it's a keyword, then you might repeat it once or twice.
That's right.
Because this person's asking about paraphrasing. So when it's not a keyword, that's when you can use your synonyms, your paraphrasing to avoid repetition.
If it's a keyword, you want to repeat that word, because if you choose a synonym for example, increasing taxes, if you choose a synonym, it might lead the reader in a different direction and confuse them. The keyword keeps the topic focused and unified. Just don't want to repeat it too often, otherwise it loses that power of cohesion.
I'd say to that as well, Paul, don't forget everyone, word forms, right? Increasing taxes, even in your very repetitive version, it had some variety of word form, right? It's like the increase of taxes, or increased taxation, just to vary it between nouns, verbs, adjectives, and that can help switch things up too.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, because I think a lot of learners, they think that they have to always find a different word, right? But you don't. You can use variety by, like Phil says, using different word forms. So you used the noun once, and now you can use the verb, for example, and that still adds variety to your writing.
Yeah, this is what I was trying to get at, guys, when I mentioned that as learners are learning, they're taught to, use synonyms to develop their vocabulary. So the teachers at the intermediate or beginner level are kind of turning on the tap, but then the student never learns to turn off the tap and control the use of these synonyms. I think that is sometimes missing from their education. And that's why these habits kind of can get out of control, repetition or overly using synonyms, and then the reader can get lost. One of the challenges, or one of the things that I do when I work with a student who's writing at, say, the college level, is kind of reel in some of these habits that have never been switched off, and try to build into their skill set a bit more control and command of their of these skills.
Hey guys,
here's another question, guys.
Yeah, I was going to ask about, there's an interesting question about idioms. I don't know if that's the one that you're looking at, Paul. Facebook
can
user
you tell me
says,
who?
Yeah, it's Facebook user says, using idioms is very interesting, but for my writing, I don't really know how many of them I should use for a 250-word writing essay.
I can't.
There's also a question from Isabella Maria. We will get to you, Isabella. We'll try and answer that question too.
So let me just find it, guys.
Maybe you
There's
can't
a lot
see
of comments
it.
here. It's here, but it's among many, many. So Isabella and.
Just while you're looking for that, I mean, about idioms, right? So we don't want to force idioms into our writing, right? Because then that's not natural, is it? So yeah, if you're writing a 250-word essay, don't feel like you have to suddenly use lots of idioms, right? There's a time and a place. What I would say is that it's very useful to know a lot of interesting idioms, so that when that time and place comes, you naturally come up with the idiom. You have it stored in your memory. What about you guys? What would you say about using idioms?
Well, I would say in academic writing, it can cause trouble because the reader may not know the idiom. They may not be familiar with the meaning. So I would always encourage writers to work with more literal expressions, and for the most part, avoid figurative expressions. Phil, any thoughts about?
I
about
would
that?
say they can be really useful and help add color to your writing. In terms of natural English, we want them to be generally understood. So don't pick ones which you're either not confident 100% with what it means, or you think that other people might not be. If it's something that is common in the English speaking world and you're confident with it and you've seen it in a location with good editorial standard, like a newspaper article or magazine or something, then yeah, by all means use it and think they can add a bit of color.
On the other hand, avoid the really cliche idioms, right? So, for example, things like raining cats and dogs, like no one says that anymore. Sounds like really old-fashioned cliche. And what happens is when you use cliche idioms, it just loses its impact. It just becomes kind of boring. So use idioms that are well known so your audience will understand, but that have not been overused.
And a helpful tip on what a cliche is, because there's no agreement on if something is definitely a cliche or not, is there are some digital tools. Some of the tools that I think we're sharing in the resource pack will highlight cliches. Will say you've got raining cats and dogs in there, or like a headless chicken or something like that, and it's a bit overused. So yeah, you can use that.
We've got 2 questions here, guys, related to the use of passive voice. Any thoughts on that?
Is the use of passive voice always informal? So, I mean, especially in terms of journalistic writing, content writing, you generally want to avoid the passive voice, right? But there is a time and a place to use it, right? So, so you want to keep your writing active. So you use the active voice as much as possible. That will keep your writing lively. But at times, the passive voice is necessary, right? For example, if we don't know who the doer of the action is, that's a time when we might use the passive voice.
Along those lines, I would say in academic writing, especially if there's research involved or a study involved, let's say you do a joint study, the 3 of us did some research. Well, we did the research, right? So the entire paper is going to be what we did. We examined the microbes and we determined this and that. It would be incredibly repetitive. So there is a place for passive there, because we can eliminate the subject, because it's clear that the entire study was done by us. Eliminate that subject and focus on what happened, right? The microbes were examined. That's where passive can be useful, when there's a consistent subject, and it helps you avoid repetition. So it does have its place sometimes in academic writing, but not overuse, of
I'd
course.
agree, Paul. I mean, especially in reports as well as asking about reports. Yeah, it's highly relevant there, because you can say the results were obtained or were collected. It doesn't matter that you did them. That's when we use passive voice. It's when it doesn't matter, or we don't want to mention the person who is involved. Also, in some polite situations where you don't want to point out a mistake, or you don't want to make a recommendation too strongly, you could use the passive voice. So definitely a good idea in reports. And that's one example of AI telling us passive voice is bad, remove it. And, it's not helping everyone, is it? But yeah, sorry, Pete, what were you going to say?
In contrast to that, so in contrast with reports, right? If you're, writing stories, right? You're doing storytelling, then the characters are important, their experiences. So that's when you want to use a lot of active voice.
Yeah. And in journalism, a lot of it is narrative, right? You're telling about what happened and who did it. Here's another one, guys. What do you think about that?
So I don't know about
collocations and phrasal
advanced. I'm
verbs.
not sure advanced would be the word. So as I said, if you're using phrasal verbs, that can help to be a little less formal, a little more conversational. About collocations, they're very useful, and I was going to just complement a little bit what Phil was saying. The way to learn collocations is really to notice them a lot. So when you're reading, I think one mistake some learners make is that they think learning vocabulary might be learning words, right? Single words. But if you learn collocations, then that really helps to, and this is all about sounding natural, right? So the thing about collocations is the words naturally go together. So, I mean, to answer the question, I'm not sure if we learn collocation to sound more advanced. It's more to sound more natural, to help our writing flow, to make it more readable. If you imagine that, um, you know, proficient users of English, they're very used to seeing these combinations of words. So when we use collocations in our writing, it makes it more readable for that very reason.
Yeah, I'd echo that on the word advanced. We need to think about what makes writing effective to the reader. So don't worry if you think this writing sounds basic or sounds, it's not using all these advanced bells and whistles and terms. Just think about what the reader wants and needs and try and provide that.
Here's another one, guys. Where is it? What is the best form, right? Can't quite see that. The references are notes in the text. Erica, I wonder if you mean like cited references in research writing. In that case, it really depends on your course, your teacher, or the publication. They may insist on any one of a number of citation styles like MLA, APA, Chicago style. I'm not sure. Do you guys use those in the UK? Those are very common in North America. MLA, APA, Chicago style with footnotes.
Yeah, again, it depends, doesn't it, on the publication, on the teacher. Yeah, I agree with that.
Someone has a comment here. Just want to clarify. I like your suggestions about using signposts to get our writing oriented, but I don't acknowledge that why we don't need to paragraph our writing. Well, I didn't actually say we don't need to paragraph writing. In fact, my suggestion was that use the power of a paragraph to unify your single idea and keep it focused on the main idea, and then move to another paragraph. So your essay will still consist of a variety of paragraphs, and each one should be a distinct idea. That's really what I was getting at. You definitely need to paragraph your writing. Very nice.
I think we've got a question from Katia I've seen on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you've seen that, Paul. It's about balancing personal style. I'll read it just while Paul's looking for it, and we'll try and answer. I haven't had a chance to think about this yet, but it sounds interesting. So thanks for that, Katia. Any tips on how to balance personal style with writing for an audience that doesn't necessarily have English as its first language, especially on social media? I like to use a couple of questions, for example, to make it more conversational. Any other ideas? Yeah, that's a
right
very
up your alley,
interesting one. I'd have to think about it a bit more. It sounds like you've done some good thinking about it, Katia, and you've got these short, simple questions to ask them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, because when you ask questions, it just leads on to the next sentence, right? So, especially writing on social media, it's all about making every sentence count, right? And you're having a conversation with your audience. So, using questions, using like cliffhangers, right? So that the audience wants to read on to find out what you're going to say. That all helps.
I'd say there's a lot of other things that come into personal style on social media as well, because it's such a visual medium. The way that you format the text, even things like emojis, links, pictures, things that you use that can add to your personal style as well. But I tried to develop a few phrases which people recognize, maybe not necessarily catchphrases, but things which people recognize. And it can be, I think, another element of personal style, Katia, that you might agree with, that you might already use, is sentence fragments. So not using full grammatical sentences, especially on social media, is, starting sentences with and or but, or, having just short phrases as a sentence. So all of those kind of things can contribute to your voice. We've talked about voice before on the podcast, haven't we? I'm trying to remember what we said.
Yeah, that was a great topic.
Maybe
I was thinking as well,
cultural references as well. That's something I talk about. Cultural references that will resonate with your audience, but also show who you are and where you're from. Whether that's humor, whether it's mentioning certain topics, or certain people, places that they'll recognize. I think that comes into it too.
Anyone else have questions? I think that's all the outstanding questions. Lots of thank yous. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, I guess we should say, if anyone does have any other questions, we're always available. You can ask us on social media, connect with us. And if you've got the resources pack, you'll have all of the links for where you can find the podcast and our individual emails and links.
By the way, in answer to this request, we have an entire podcast episode about the value of reading as a writer. So definitely check that out, and the link to our podcast will be below. Okay, very nice.
Thanks for all these comments, everyone. Yeah. Isabella is saying our next session. Not sure when that will be, but we'll try and do some more lives, because it's been really great, hasn't it? Like chatting with everyone and getting their questions.
Absolutely. But I wonder, lads, if we should wrap it up. I think we've answered everyone's questions, hopefully. About that link, again, if you weren't able to access the link, maybe we have to reset the Google Drive document to make it available to anyone to download. I'm not sure how that works, but somebody mentioned they had trouble.
I think it was a problem with someone copying it from the chat, and maybe that they weren't able to copy the full address. I think it's been working for people. Feel free to tell us in the comments if you've managed to download it or see it. If you haven't, just message us.
And I'll put it in here one more time from the Restream main thread. Well, guys, I've really enjoyed listening to what you have to say about this topic today, and great to be together again on screen.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And yeah, thanks to our audience. Thanks for everybody who turned up. Hope you got lots of value out of this webinar.
Absolutely. Okay, so someone confirms that they were able to access the document. Fantastic.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Well, we'll have to think of another topic to talk about next time.
Yes.
Feel free to
Wonderful.
Let us know if you've got any ideas, because that's always something we're looking for on the podcast, to help more writers around the world.
Absolutely. And that is why we do this, to help you guys improve and develop your skills in different genres of writing. Any final thoughts or words, guys?
Are you asking your co-host, or are you asking the audience?
Co-host, yes, sorry. guys,
Can we just say
gentlemen?
it's a broad topic, isn't it? What we've covered today. So I mean, there's obviously lots more to say. So as Phil said, don't hesitate to reach out with more questions, because to be honest, this is a topic we could talk about for hours easily.
Yeah.
Nothing more from me, Paul. Just thanks for everyone for coming along. It's been brilliant to see so many of you here.
Absolutely. So all of our links, personal links, the podcast link, all of that will be down below. The recording of this will be available. I guess, guys, we'll share the link to the recording for those of you who couldn't see it today. But on behalf of Pete and Phil, I'm Paul. I'd like to say thank you for turning up today.